All right, let's move on to characters, okay? Characters. They're the heart of every story. Without them, fiction just doesn't work. When you think of your favorite book, what comes to mind? I'm betting that it's the characters, right? And as a writer, you need to know your characters, because the more you know about them, the more they will come off the page and be accepted by the reader. This is kind of an example of how to think like a writer. Not only are you seeing the physical side of your characters, but you need to imagine their inner workings, their inner conflicts, and think about their feelings and emotions. It's very helpful for writing, and to be able to let your character come to life and let their characteristics drive the story. You might, if you know your character and you have a great feeling for them, you'll often hear authors say things like their character did something they didn't expect. They speak as if the character is alive and behaving on its own. I'm thinking this is just the point when you have developed your character to such a high level that it will almost seem like it's alive. Now, does a character have to be a human? Not really, but since stories are for human entertainment, connecting with a human-like character is much easier for a majority of readers. However, characters can be anything. They can be like an animal, like in Jack London's Call of the Wild. The main character was a dog, and you were looking through the dog's perspective. They can be an animal that acts like a human, like the characters in The Wind in the Willows. They could also be non-living things, like a dump truck or a computer or a robot. In fact, using a non-living character like a robot is a great way to contrast the human experience. If you're really getting deep into it, okay. So for example, having a robot show the logical, non-emotional side of a story would be like a very stark contrast to someone who's very emotional with lots of ups and downs, things that we experience as humans. Non-human characters can also be used as metaphors. Creating a character that is a powerful tree, for example, could be used as a metaphor for the power of nature. Or Shel Silverstein, he used a tree in his book, The Giving Tree, to represent the unselfish love of a parent, right? So characters can be anything. However, it's up to you to make the reader interested and connect with them. If you don't do that, usually the story will fail. You need a character that's relatable and likable to the reader. Being relatable is essential for all characters, even evil villains. You can show this by showing that the villain is normal in some way. Maybe they deal with everyday problems and struggles that we do. Even an evil villain could be shown loving their family, probably in a dysfunctional way, but maybe they're still trying somehow. Having your character show their flaws or make bad decisions makes them feel more human. If they're always good or always evil, they'll feel a little artificial. Having a bit of a gray zone in them will make them more relatable. It's like most people in life. You're not consistent all the time. There are times in our lives when we're not likable. People, including yourself, could get grumpy, make bad decisions, be indecisive. To feel realistic, characters need to be inconsistent some of the times too. Even the happiest of characters could have a grumpy moment. If a character is perfect all the time, they kind of sometimes feel a bit pompous or something like that, which might be great for one character, maybe a small character, but for a main character, it can get stale very quickly. If a reader can predict how the character is going to behave 100% of the time, it's not as much fun to read. Now, on the other hand, creating likable characters is much easier. Just have a character do something unselfish at the beginning of the book, and you'll accomplish this. This is an idea that comes from Save the Cat. I don't know if you've ever run across Save the Cat, but you just have a character doing something like saving a cat out of a tree. You instantly like the character. You can show other characters liking them too. This is kind of a psychological trick. If somebody likes them, maybe I can too. They're trustworthy, they've been vetted. You could show the characters' passions too, their love, dreams, family, their causes they're fighting for, right up front, right away, and make it very obvious. It's a great way to make them feel unique and human. It's all well and good to have relatable and likable characters, but we need a bit more. We need them to do something. If they sat around all day drinking tea, it would not be very entertaining. There needs to be a problem of some sort. Characters love a character who has or readers love a character who has a struggle, who gets beat down, and then in the end, at the lowest point of their life, they rise up and overcome the odds. Those are kind of some of the best stories, aren't they? So the character needs to have some sort of conflict. They need to have, if you think about it, they just need to have something they want and a reason they can't get it. So you can have an external want. Maybe like they want a chest full of jewels, but there's a dragon in the way. So that's an example of an external want, and I guess we can call it like a wall. An internal want and a wall might be they want to get married, but they have commitment issues. As a writer, you need to show that the character wants something that's interesting to us. And this can vary by your taste, reader's taste, or by the genre you're writing for. So no matter what kind of story you're writing, the characters who want things are interesting to us. We want to know why they want something, and best of all, why they can't have it. To keep readers entertained, you need the character to be changing, constantly changing or progressing or moving towards their goal. Without this kind of movement, the story will feel a bit dull and boring. So it brings us to character arcs. So this is how the character develops over the time of the story. So if you do a Google search, you'll come up with all these kinds of different character arcs, like transformational arc, the Cinderella story arc, the Three Mountains arc. It just gets a little complicated. I have a really simple approach. You see the chart, you have a beginning and you have an end. They're either up or they're down by the end. So it's a positive or a negative character arc. It's simple as that. So the character arc, like I said, is just how the character changes over the course of the story. In most character arcs, the character will grow in some aspect, typically internally. They'll overcome some sort of fault or flaw they had, and they'll become a better person in the end. Maybe an example would be a story of an alcoholic deadbeat dad who changes over the course of the story, and by the end he becomes a sober, engaged father. Most of the time these changes are for the better, like that. You know, move up in society, you overcome a personal flaw, save the galaxy, something like that. There can also be negative change. This is called a tragedy, when the character does not overcome their conflict and they give in to the darker side. If you know Star Wars, you know Anakin Skywalker gives in to his anger and turns to the dark side to become Darth Vader. So that would be a definite downward character arc. See, very interesting, just not as common. It can be either good or bad. It's just how it ends up. That's just the change in the characters. The key point of a character arc is that they're in a different place at the end. That's what makes it interesting. So is it only the main characters that have an arc? No, you can have a character arc for anything, any character. You don't need to have one for a secondary character. Or if you do, they're not in the story enough to make it as dramatic. An exception to this is the iconic character. This is where they start the story at one point and they don't really change by the end. This is like your classic James Bond or superhero. You know, they're really talented and motivated at the beginning. They fight the bad guys, they solve the crime, whatever, and then by the end they're very similar. So it's more plot driven than actually character driven. Now, if you're doing a regular kind of character arc, is there a surefire way to write it that makes it good? I'm going to say yes, it's very simple. You just take a character, add some problems, mess with their lives for a few hundred pages, and then you leave them as a different person. It's really as simple as that. Any character arc can be a good character arc. Now, are there some strategies or formulas for writing a good character arc? Yes, there are. There's a whole bunch you can find online, but one of the more popular ones that's tried and true and it's used all the time is called the conflict, lie, and truth formula. It's a three-step process. You can I'll go through the outline of it right now. So the conflict, this is what your character's problem is or what they're trying to achieve. It could be something like they want to get married, they want to be happy, they might want world domination. This is just the reason they think they want to change. The lie, now this is what the character believes or they're telling themselves is the actual problem. A character might think they're unhappy because they don't have enough money. The lie is often a misconception, a fear, or a flaw in the character. And their attempts to solve the problem by using this lie actually prevent them from succeeding. Now, the truth, that's what the real problem is, as opposed to what the character believes the problem is. This is when the character realizes what is wrong and embraces the truth. They use this truth in order to accomplish their goal. So the character might realize that money is not why they were unhappy. In fact, it was because they didn't have anyone to love in their life. So they switch their priorities from finding money to finding love. The end. So typically these three steps occur in specific places in the story for maximum dramatical effect, of course. Step one, this occurs in the first act. It's the initial problem they think. This is what the conflict is. Step two occurs in the second act, where the character attempts to solve their problem by using this lie. But the lie keeps thwarting their progress. There might be hints at the truth along the way, and the character might start to change in order to solve their problem. So step three occurs in the final act, the third act, climax, when they finally embrace the truth in order to solve their problem. They end up a changed person at the end. There's your perfect arc. A great example of this is While You Were Sleeping, with Sandra Bullock. So Sandra Bullock's lonely and single, and she thinks that if she marries a good-looking guy, the guy that comes through her train ticket booth every morning, that would be her key to happiness, is marrying this guy. So the truth is, the good-looking guy's brother is actually her perfect match. So in Act 1, it shows her lonely life and that she's just looking for a man to marry to be happy. Act 2 is when she saves the guy. She thinks marrying this good-looking guy will solve all her problems. She saves him from the train track, and she tries to make her lie work by telling the family that she's the fiance and letting it work itself out. And as she's going along, we can see the truth, that she's forming a real relationship with the brother. So right at the end, the truth is revealed when the good-looking guy wakes up from his coma and Sandra just can't go through with the marriage. And then she realized that she just needed to marry the brother because he was the perfect match. All right, settle in here because this is a long one, building a character. So as I introduced earlier, you need to know your characters, their personalities, their flaws, their backstory. You need to be invested in these characters to pass along all this stuff to the reader. And you want the reader to become invested in your characters in return. J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, is very extreme in this. You can find videos for her online going through every character in Harry Potter, and there's hundreds of them, and she knows every detail about the character, their background, their family tree, where they're going to end up in 10 years after the series ends. She's pretty extreme in this. You can take it as far as you want. You might run across something to help you organize your characters. There's all these sheets out there, character sheets, character profiles you can write up a bunch of stuff about them. You can write down important parts of their lives, descriptions about them, personalities, their likes and dislikes, their eye color, their hair color, all that. You could just do a web search. You'll find a hockey sock full of these. Now, do you need them? It depends on how you work. If you feel better planning ahead and creating a character's intimate details before you even start writing the story, then these sheets are for you. If you're the kind of writer who just usually has a general idea of what your character will behave and react like, you have the flexibility. You might want to write a few things down, or you might not need these character sheets at all. Personally, I think they're useful to a certain extent. However, these sheets can be a bit of a waste of time if you take them too far, and you put a lot of time and effort into this instead of actually writing the story. And sometimes you won't even know enough about the characters, and you'll end up throwing in some stereotypes that could actually cause problems later on in your story. Or you'll just let these characters' profiles just kind of guide the story when you had a different idea. It can get confusing. Maybe instead, when you're at the beginning stages of a book, you might want to jot down characters' names, a brief note on how they fit into the story, their character arc, maybe a bit about their personality, just general stuff. And only keep these characters keep this character straight in the early stages when you're writing it down and you're just starting the story and you don't really have a good feel for them. Especially if you have like a few characters or a number of characters, not just one or two. But by the time you're writing the story, you should have a good idea of what your characters are going to be like. They should have their own voice that will come out on the page. For example, when you're on the bus and you overhear a funny conversation, you should find yourself saying, "Oh, character X would probably say something like that." It's kind of your responsibility to know these characters. You made them, nobody else knows anything about them, and if you don't care about them, then why will the reader care about them? So the characters' motivations. So if you watched anything online from Brandon Sanderson, he claims the most important aspect of a character is their motivation. Sanderson believes that you need to establish motivation for your character and be consistent, and we want to make sure motivation is not the goal. Goals can be achieved, and then the story is done. Motivation is the why. It continues on after even. Like, why do they want this goal? Why do they behave the way they behave? And a person's motivations can explain why they have the problem, why they're behaving the way they are, their backstory, even their flaws. It also keeps a character moving, which keeps the story interesting and the readers turning the page. Character quirks. So personality quirks, handicaps, flaws, are they important? I bet at some point you've had a great idea for this quirky character. Maybe he only talks in movie quotes, or somebody who's obsessed with baseball stats, or this character and she forgets things 5 minutes later. It can make a story, right? So whatever quirk, personality, flaw that you've come up with, if you love it, go ahead and use it. We've all read enough cardboard characters that it's fun to have something fresh and unique. And quirky characters can make a book memorable, right? But the only problem is when you create a character that just don't do it willy-nilly. They don't need a weird quirk just to add into the book. If you're adding quirks to a character, it's best if they fit into the story somehow. You can usually make this happen with a little work. For example, if you have a character who's an obsessive stamp collector, maybe it doesn't really fit into the plot because you're writing an urban fantasy or something. But you can use that quirk to show how motivated the character can be. Like perhaps they will go to extreme lengths to collect rare Swedish stamps. It will make it a little more believable when an adventure opportunity comes up and they go to a place because they're missing a stamp. Or you can use it to develop the character and make them more likable or relatable. You could show the stamp collector pining away at that rare stamp only found in Sweden, and that they can't travel there to get it because they're taking care of their bed-bound parents and they feel guilty leaving them. See, this even brings up some of the backstory. Like perhaps the stamp collector collects stamps because he had a grandparent who did, and they used to live in a different country, and that's why he only collects Swedish stamps. So you could even use it to create a conflict. Like the stamp collector has a relationship problem because they won't go to Comic-Con with their partner because the stamp shows at the same time, and this always happens, and the quirk always gets in the way. So you can use the quirk to enhance essential parts of the story, like the plot or the character building or the setting. A quirk is something you don't need to add to every character, though, so use it responsibly. Backstory. A character's backstory is usually an important part of the story. It's great for character development. It can hold key facts that reveal the plot. It can be the catalyst to a character's motivations. There's a variety of reasons to add a backstory. It's also kind of human nature, right? To be interested in someone's backstory. We like to know where this person came from or what they experienced in the past. It gives us an idea maybe of how we think they might behave in the future. So the rule of thumb on backstory is to work it in, little bit by little bit, weaving clues on the character's history throughout the story. Starting a book with a big backstory blurb, it's done often and it will often bore the reader. They want to be intrigued by the character first. Once that is achieved, then characters want to know a bit about their past. Now, if the backstory is essential to the plot for some reason, try to avoid a big prologue if possible and try and work it in to make it seem natural. Now, diverse characters. You need to create a kind of a diverse cast of characters when you're writing a story. If you've ever read a book where the characters all sound the same, you probably didn't finish it, or you threw it across the rooms a couple of times in a fit of confusion, right? Just like in real life, everyone has a different voice, different characteristics. If everyone was the same, life would be very mundane and boring. People read books with an expectation that they're going to get a bunch of different characters. The death of a character. If you're going to kill off a character, make it worthwhile. Make it for a reason, not just a random death. I know we all kind of had that idea before. I'll kill off this character. So it works best when the character dies because of their own actions or motivations, or another character's actions or motivations. Just a random anvil falling on a character, it's not going to be as satisfying. And it might look like you're an author who has no plan, no story, and you're maybe borderline a psycho. Well, again, your personal choice. You can do that. It's art, okay? Killing off a character when you're at the peak of the arc, very risky. George R.R. Martin pulls it off in the Game of Thrones, though. But for most stories, it will just aggravate the reader. They'll get into it, get all invested, and then the character dies. Describing characters. There's a couple ways to describe characters. There's the descriptive method and the prescriptive method. I'm going to get right into the definition of each one. Descriptive is presenting observations. Prescriptive is the imposition of rules or methods. It's an attempt to impose these rules of correct usage. You'll want to stick with descriptive for 99% of your writing. What you want to do is pick and choose specific descriptions of the character and then show them to the reader. This is the descriptive part. You let the reader imagine or fill in the gaps of who your character is. Readers are smart, and half the fun of reading is using your mind and imagination to create a character. Having the writer tell the reader exactly how to feel, prescriptive, is like having everything laid out for you without any room for mystery or flexibility, and just denying the reader solving those little puzzles of why the character did something. For readers, prescriptive writing is just not as satisfying. So I'll try and give you an example. A sentence like, "He finished his vanilla cone and declined another," which showed just how full he was. how he always chose the plain and simple things in life, and that he was still determined to lose those extra few pounds and get abs of steel and win the heart of the girl. You should have stopped at, he finished his vanilla cone and declined another. If you've done a good job of building up this character's motivations and traits before this, you can trust that the reader will be able to make these connections. These are the things that keep readers engaged because they'll start to feel like they know the character and they will want to keep reading and see what feel more satisfied. If you keep telling them what's happening, it's just not as fun to read.